The massacre that changed everything. The golden light of a twin sun bathed Arden 4, one of humanity's youngest interstellar colonies. Its vast landscapes of blue grass fields and violet-leaf trees painted a picture of peace. The colony itself, a small but thriving settlement, bustled with activity as families went about their daily routines, unaware that the next few minutes would forever change the course of history. Among them was Lena Carter, a 7-year-old girl with curly brown hair and a heart full of curiosity. She giggled as she chased a mechanical butterfly through the colony square, her tiny hands reaching out for its shimmering wings. Nearby, her father, Governor Elias Carter, watched her with a proud smile, speaking with colony officials about the day's progress. But then, the sky darkened. The first warning was not sirens, nor gunfire, but silence. The once bustling marketplace came to a halt as shadows descended from above. A massive warship, sleek and menacing, hovered above the colony. Then another, and another. The light from the setting suns was blotted out by dozens of colossal ships, their metallic exteriors bearing the unmistakable insignia of the Zorvith Dominion, a race of warlords known across the galaxy for their cruelty. The Zorvith did not send warnings. They did not ask for surrender. They only sent death. The attack begins. The first blast came from high orbit, a plasma beam slicing through the colony's central command tower like a hot knife through flesh. Debris exploded into the sky as buildings crumbled, flames engulfing the streets. The air filled with screams, some of terror, others cut short by the merciless destruction. Then the ground forces arrived. Drop pods crashed into the streets, their doors bursting open to reveal 8-foot-tall armored warriors with deep red exoskeletons, black eyes burning with malice. Their weapons, massive particle cannons, glowed with blue energy as they unleashed unrelenting firepower upon the defenseless civilians. Lena's butterfly, once dancing joyfully in the air, was now just a pile of molten metal on the ground. Her tiny hands trembled as she turned to her father, confusion and fear in her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. Elias grabbed her and ran. "G2VE shield tears," he bellowed to the colonists. But deep down, he knew there was no shelter deep enough to protect them from the Zorvith. No mercy. Across the colony, men, women, and children fled in terror. Some tried to fight back, picking up rifles meant for hunting, but their bullets bounced harmlessly off the Zorvith warriors' thick carapace armor. One soldier, a brute named General Volker, laughed as he ripped a man's arm clean off and threw his lifeless body against a burning building. The Zorvith delighted in slaughter, reveling in the suffering they caused. Elias sprinted toward the evacuation zone, holding Lena tightly against his chest. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind racing. He had one job now: save his daughter. But then, a shadow loomed over them. Volker stepped into their path, his massive clawed foot crushing the remains of a fallen colonist beneath him. His black, soulless eyes locked onto Elias and Lena, and a slow, predatory grin spread across his alien features. Running. Volker's voice was deep and guttural, carrying amusement. "Where is your fight, human?" Elias froze, holding Lena closer. His pulse pounded in his ears. He knew what was coming. Volker raised his particle cannon. Elias had only a second to react. He spun, trying to shield his daughter. A plasma shot tore through his back. The world blurred as Elias collapsed onto the ground, his body seizing in agony. Lena tumbled out of his grasp, hitting the dirt with a frightened cry. She scrambled up, crawling to her father. His eyes, once filled with determination, began to fade. "Daddy." Her voice shook. Elias's fingers trembled as he reached for her, one last time. But before he could speak, before he could whisper a final word of comfort, Volker grabbed Lena by the throat. She let out a choked gasp, her small fingers clawing at the Zorvith's iron grip. The entire colony froze, those still alive, watching in horror. Volker turned to them, raising the struggling child into the air. His warriors stood behind him, watching in eerie silence, waiting. A cruel smile spread across his monstrous face. This is why humans are weak. And then, with one brutal squeeze, the life left Lena's tiny body. Volker tossed her lifeless form onto the blood-soaked ground. The colony screamed. Elias, still clinging to the last threads of life, saw his daughter's small, broken body. A sound rose in his throat. Not a scream, not a cry, but a hollow, broken sob. His vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges. He felt nothing. And then he felt rage. Not just his own, but something greater. Something ancient. Something waiting. As his breath slowed, Elias saw something in the sky above. A single, unmarked black warship piercing through the clouds. And in that moment, he knew. The Zorvath had made a mistake. Because someone was coming. Someone who would not forgive. Someone who would not forget. Someone who would make them suffer. And then, everything went black. The awakening of the ghost. Deep space, classified location. Light flickered in the dark chamber, casting long shadows over the cold metal walls. A rhythmic beeping filled the air, steady and precise. Somewhere in the distance, machinery hummed, the sound of gears shifting and computers processing data in silence. Then, a single word broke through the quiet. Wake him up. Inside a cryostasis pod, a man stirred. Frost melted from the reinforced glass, revealing a figure encased in shadows. His breath slow but controlled, his mind sharpening even before his body was fully awake. A metallic hiss filled the chamber as the pod's locks disengage. The door slid open, releasing a gust of cold mist into the dimly lit room. He stepped out, bare feet hitting the cold metal floor, his posture relaxed. But there was something deadly in the way he moved. Agent Jackson Gray was awake. Across the room, Commander Evelyn Voss stood watching, her arms crossed, her uniform pristine despite the weight of the moment. She had seen this process many times before, had awakened killers from their sleep for missions that had changed the course of history. But this time was different. Gray blinked once, adjusting to the lights. He rolled his shoulders, his muscles coiled like a predator testing its body before the hunt. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Evelyn. Report. Evelyn took a deep breath. The Zorvath have crossed the line. Gray remained silent, waiting. She tapped on a nearby console, bringing up a holographic projection of Eden 4, the colony that had been reduced to a smoking graveyard less than 24 hours ago. Footage played in the air before them. Civilians running, screaming. The Zorvath warriors, towering and monstrous, slaughtering without mercy. And then the girl, Lena Carter. Gray didn't blink as he watched the moment unfold. The way the warlord, Volker, had lifted her tiny frame, how she had struggled, how her father had collapsed, helpless. And then the death, the throw, the silence. For a long moment, nothing in the room moved. Evelyn exhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral. Her name was Lena, daughter of Governor Elias Carter. The Zorvath executed her in front of her people. Then they wiped out the colony. No survivors. Gray's fingers curled into a fist. Not out of rage. Not yet. It was control. He turned toward the holographic display, studying the enemy forces, their fleet formations, their troop movements. The Zorvath were predictable. They struck, they burned, they moved on. They expected humanity to respond with politics and hesitation. This time, they were wrong. Evelyn tapped the screen again, zooming in on one name. Admiral Volker. The warlord who had ordered the execution. The monster who had smiled as he crushed a child's throat. Gray's voice was calm. What are my parameters? Evelyn straightened. This isn't a war. This is a message. Gray nodded. He understood. No armies. No fleets. No grand battles. Just him. The Zorvath thought they could strike without consequences, that humanity would hesitate, but they had forgotten something crucial. Humans didn't just fight wars. They ended them. Preparing for the hunt, Evelyn led Gray through the dimly lit corridors of the facility. Everything he needed had already been prepared. Weapons, armor, a ship. He suited up in silence, pulling on the black exo-combat suit, the nano-y fabric tightening around his body, adjusting to his form like a second skin. The reinforced plating along his arms and legs was resistant to most energy weapons, but Gray didn't intend to get hit. From a locked compartment, he retrieved his blade, a short, serrated combat knife, forged from an alloy designed to cut through alien armor like paper. A soldier would use a gun. An assassin would use silence. Gray would use both. He holstered 2 silenced plasma pistols onto his belt, then secured a single silver coin in the hidden pocket of his sleeve. A symbol, a calling card. Evelyn watched him for a moment before speaking. "They don't know who you are, Gray." He finished adjusting his armor, then looked at her. "They will." She held his gaze. "No survivors, no warnings. Make it brutal." Gray gave a single nod. He stepped onto the dropship. The doors sealed behind him. And then he was gone. A new kind of fear. Zorvath flagship, War Station Valther. Admiral Volker sat in his personal chamber, watching the stars beyond the massive viewport. His mind was at ease, his victory absolute. The destruction of Eden 4 had been nothing more than a display of power, a message to humanity. And they would do nothing. They never did. A deep chuckle rumbled in his throat as he poured himself a goblet of Mulrak blood wine, the favored drink of Zorvath warriors. His black armor gleamed in the dim light, his massive clawed fingers tapping rhythmically against the metal surface of his throne. Then, a low chime interrupted the silence. Volker frowned, turning toward the control panel. A message had just been delivered to his personal console. He activated the screen. A single object was waiting for him, a live feed from one of their outer stations. The screen flickered, then focused, showing a room filled with dead Zorvath soldiers. Volker's clawed fingers tightened around the goblet. He leaned forward, his amusement fading. A figure moved through the scene, walking past the bodies. Not a soldier, not an army, just one man, Jackson Gray. Volker's blood ran cold as he saw what was left behind. A single silver coin, the mark of a ghost. The screen flickered again, and Volker realized this was not just an attack. This was a hunt, and he was the prey. The hunt begins. Infiltration. The void of space stretched endlessly beyond the cockpit of Gray's stealth cruiser, its hull absorbing all light, rendering it nearly invisible. Drifting among the debris of a forgotten skirmish, he was a phantom in the dark, unseen, unheard. Ahead, like a monstrous predator lurking in the abyss, the Zorvath War Station, Valther, hung in the void. Massive in scale, armed to the teeth, it was built to withstand fleet-scale assaults. But tonight, it wasn't facing an army. It was facing him. Jackson Gray sat in his pilot's seat, eyes locked onto the holographic display. Security patrols, rotation cycles, potential breach points, all mapped, all accounted for. He had studied every inch of the station before making his move. A soldier would try to fight his way in. A strategist would try to outmaneuver them. Gray, he would walk straight through the front door. His fingers danced over the controls, and the ship's thrusters fired just enough to nudge the cruiser toward the station's underbelly. His target was the exhaust ducts, the station's cooling system, large enough for a fighter to squeeze through, but not a warship. Gray wasn't a warship. He was a scalpel, and tonight, the Zorvath were going to be dissected. A silent approach, a smooth landing. And then, he was inside. A trail of shadows. The corridors of the war station were dimly lit, pulsating with the eerie glow of alien power cells. Zorvath engineers patrolled the halls, their reptilian eyes scanning for signs of trouble. They didn't see him. Gray moved like a ghost, slipping past them, pressing against shadows, becoming one with the darkness. He had no need for brute force yet. The key to war was timing. As he approached the first security checkpoint, a Zorvath warrior stood blocking the way, towering, armored, clawed hands gripping a plasma rifle. A mistake. Gray lunged, silent, efficient, lethal. A blade flashed. The Zorvath gurgled, his throat slit before he could even register the attack. Gray caught the massive body and lowered it to the ground, blood pooling at his feet. One down, many more to go. No mercy, no survivors. Admiral Vokar was not a fool. He had felt something shift the moment he saw the footage of the silver coin left behind on Station 9. He had spent his life studying war, but this was something different. It wasn't an invasion. There were no fleets, no battle formations, just a man. And yet, a strange unease crept into Vokar's bones. He had underestimated humans before. Their frail bodies, their weak worlds, their love for peace and diplomacy. He had thought them predictable. But now, the lights in his personal chamber flickered. Vokar's claws tightened around the edge of his command desk. Something was here. The first message. Gray moved deeper into the war station, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Every Zorvath he encountered fell in silence. Some were gutted with a single, precise blade strike. Some were snapped like fragile twigs. Some never saw him coming at all. One moment standing guard, the next, throats sliced, their bodies slumped against the walls. Each time he left a silver coin beside the corpse. A signature, a warning. Vokar's nightmare begins. By the time the first alarm sounded, Vokar knew it was already too late. "Status report," he barked, his voice a snarl of rage and fear. The control room was chaos. Zorvath officers scrambled for answers, their screens filled with security footage of dead guards, halls littered with bodies. "Sir, the intruder has breached multiple levels." Multiple levels. Vokar slammed his fist onto the command table. "What kind of force are we dealing with? How many are there?" A nervous officer swallowed before responding. "One. Sir, there's only one." Silence fell over the room. "One." Vokar's claws tensed. Impossible. No single human could take down an entire war station. Yet, the proof was undeniable. This was not war. This was slaughter. Vokar felt something alien creep into his mind. Was it fear? He refused to believe it. With a snarl, he pointed toward the control panel. "Seal off all exits. Deploy the hunters. And bring me this human's head." The hunters awaken. Deep within the war station, massive cryo chambers hissed open. The hunters, Zorvath's most elite warriors, stepped out of their pods. Unlike the foot soldiers, these creatures were bred for one thing: assassination. Their armor was thick, their claws sharper than steel, and their neural implants enhanced their reflexes to superhuman levels. They had never failed. They never would. At least, that's what they thought. A predator among monsters. Gray heard them before he saw them. The low, rumbling growls of creatures engineered for death. He stood in the center of a massive, open corridor. The lights flickered above him, casting eerie shadows. And then, the hunters stepped forward. Twice his size, heavily armored, teeth dripping with venom. Their yellow eyes locked onto him, unblinking. A normal man would run. "Gray?" He smiled. "Let's see what you've got." The first hunter lunged, claws flashing. Gray sidestepped, his movements faster than any human should be. He ducked under a second strike, his combat knife already slicing upward, severing an artery. The hunter roared, stumbling, bleeding out before he even hit the ground. The other two attacked at once, blades, claws, teeth flashing. Gray was a storm of motion. A gunshot. One hunter dropped. A spinning blade. Another collapsed, gurgling. Then silence. Gray stood among the corpses, breathing steadily. Blood dripped from his blade. His eyes remained cold, calculating, unshaken. He was not human in that moment. He was death incarnate. Voker's final warning. Alarms blared across the war station. Voker could barely contain his rage. How? How was this possible? A single human had butchered their best warriors. Then the comms crackled to life. A voice, calm, measured, deadly. Gray. Voker. The Admiral's blood ran cold. I want you to listen carefully. I'm going to kill you. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. And you won't see it coming. Your war ends here. The line went dead. And on Voker's screen, a single silver coin sat on his command desk, inside his own locked chamber. Voker stumbled back. Gray had already been there.